I'm going to introduce Elizia Artis. She's going to present today on effective data collection so that you guys can use some of those tools throughout your year. And then after that, we will just go over a few bits of housekeeping and some dates to be aware of. If you guys have any questions, you can type them in the question box and we will get to them, or you can raise your hand. But Elizia is going to take over for her presentation and be in control of all of that.
Alrighty, hello everyone. I'm going to try to see if I can sync up my presentation really quickly.
Do you have control of the mouse and keyboard?
No, I don't think so.
Okay, well.
Or I do?
Yeah.
Okay, like everyone can see me moving that? Okie dokie.
Hi, Elizia. This is Mary. Is it working now?
I think so.
Okay. Hi, everybody else. This is Mary. Can you guys see our screen? Can anybody see it? Yeah.
I can see the screen, but I don't think that I have the option to share my screen.
Okay. Well, we will just control it on this end.
Okay.
If that's okay with you.
That is totally fine.
Perfect.
Alrighty, cool. So, hello everybody. My name is Elizia Artis. I'm going to be doing a 30-ish minute presentation today on effective data collection. Something super important for your service year. So we're just gonna dive right in. I think somebody else's phone may not be on mute. Alrighty. So next slide. And then you have to click it again because I tried to be goofy with some technology.
Can you, is this the right
So
one?
if you click it, yeah, and then click it one more time, ta-da!
All right.
Cool. So, hi, my name is Elizia Artis. The arrow is pointing to me. That is one of my few pictures that I have with your program manager. So I thought it would be fun to bring it back up. Throwback Wednesday. So a little bit about my background and why, I'm the one telling you about this information. I used to be the program manager for the Flint Community School Corps. That is a program that is in Flint and used to be part of what's called Operation AmeriCorps. So it is AmeriCorps State and AmeriCorps Vista members, along with one NCCC team that comes in during the summer. And I also used to be the program manager for a statewide program where I worked alongside Maggie from time to time in M&A with the Mentoring to Access Core program. Both positions definitely involved having to do a heavy amount of data collection and, of course, working with members like yourselves. And then finally, I actually was an AmeriCorps member myself. I did my year of service with the Washington Service Corps in Seattle, Washington. I had one of those fun terms where I could do all my service in 10 months, but had to do 1,700 hours, which is one of the state requirements. So, you know, definitely pulling for you guys during your year of service. Totally empathize with all of the ups, downs, and in-betweens that you have, and, you know, just still really love AmeriCorps. Next slide. All right, so I was going to do a quick tech check just to make sure that everybody feels like they can chime in if they have any questions during this presentation. But I realize I also can't actually see the members who are on the call, so we don't need to do that. So we can just go to the next slide. All right, so down to the nitty-gritty. Why is data collection so important? When you really get into the bulk of your service, there's going to be times where you're like, oh my gosh, I need to take a step back and actually analyze what it is I've been doing. And sometimes it might feel a little bit tedious to be counting attendance sheets or adding up hours of how many people have participated in your programs. But right now, more than ever, it's incredibly important to keep up with your data collection. So it's most important because your program manager and your VISTA leaders report it back to CNCS. So they need to prove that you guys are doing what they promised you guys were going to be doing. It's also important because right now, more than ever, any stakeholder who loves national service or who interested in making sure that nonprofits have the capacities they need to exist and serve their communities want to advocate for you and what you're doing. Since you as AmeriCorps VISTA members can't lobby yourselves, data collection is extremely important because other individuals, say at MNA or just throughout the state of Michigan or in the nation, can advocate for you based on the data that you've collected. I think the screen may cut out a little bit at the bottom, but the data is also important for you guys. For one, it's great for when you have check-in meetings with your supervisors. So you can say whether or not what you're doing is really, you know, going at the speed and like as robust as you hoped it to be. It's also important because you guys can use it for your own resumes and cover letters. So for me, I've kept track of a lot of data throughout my years in AmeriCorps or managing AmeriCorps programs so that it can be on my resume as well. Because a lot of the times people want to see numbers and stories in your cover letter and in your resume. And so if there's something that you've directly impacted through programs that you've helped create, through curriculum that you've helped drive forward, through mentors that you've helped match, then those are numbers that you can definitely brag about to your next potential employer. Next slide. All right, so what we're going to focus on now is the two types of data that you'll be collecting through your year of service. On the outside world, they're called outputs and outcomes. So outputs are really the quickest form of data that you can collect. It's everything from an attendance sheet to the amount of hours that you know, a service project took during a day. They are very like short-term targets that you guys will be delivering throughout the year. Some of the examples that are on this slide are based on outputs that your programs specifically are looking to meet. So, you know, there's people on the call right now who need to be aiming towards being able to report out a certain number of community volunteers who have been managed or hours of service contributed to the community. And what's really important for all of these outputs and outcomes is that since they are immediate results, it's really important to work with your supervisor, your VISTA leader, or your program manager to decide when you should be documenting these things. For example, you would want to talk with your supervisor about whether or not you would consider the hours leading up to preparing for a community service event would also be included within the community service event. Just really simple things like that. All right, next slide. So outcomes are very specific changes in behavior or knowledge or skills. And, you know, sometimes that's a little bit vague. So again, always talk with your site supervisor or your Vista leader or program manager about how exactly those should be tracked. And really remember that a lot of sites, especially when you're working with, you know, say youth who have completed a program, or sorry, not completed a program, but youth who have, you know, been able to change their behavior or raise their grades, become more proficient in math. Those types of things may not happen immediately. So those are things that you may not be able to track until your third or fourth quarter. And right now it's more important to really be laying down the foundation for how to document those numbers. So really what you're going to want to be doing every time that you are, you know, running an activity or not running it, but helping out with an after school program and making sure that that model will address the outcomes that you're looking to collect, making sure that whatever data collection tool you use, which I'll be going to, into in a sec, really addresses the outcome that your program is meant to serve. All right, next slide. So this is a tech check we can actually do. Oops, sorry. Just making sure that everybody on the call does know where to find their own outputs and outcomes that are intended for their sites. So if that's something maybe where you guys on the Michigan side of things can see if folks are raising their hands. Otherwise, it's something we can talk about at the end of the call or something that you can talk about later on off of the call. But just making sure that you guys all know really what's being asked of you so that you're starting to really look at the programs that you're a part of with that critical eye to make sure that you're collecting the right data. So I guess I'll give it a sec. I'm sorry that I can't actually see something that I demanded.
Hello?
Hello.
Hi, we just unmuted you. Elizia, Ronald had his hand raised.
Cool. Hey, Ron.
Hi, Elizia. Nice to talk to you.
Hi. Did you just chime in to say hey?
No, I was actually raising my hand. I thought we were supposed to indicate that we knew where to find our thing.
Yeah, you were. So that's great. Ron knows where to find his outputs and outcomes. If anybody else is raising their hand, it's just so that they should be indicating that they know where to find these. If you don't, you know, it's definitely something that is incredibly helpful to know. I know that you guys know what you're reporting on and that you have a very specific VAD that you're going throughout the year that's going to consistently remind you what type of data you should be collecting. But it is always great to just come in knowing right away, like, okay, my site has said that we're going to have 100 people who are more financially literate by the end of this year. So just make sure that if you have time next time you check in with your site supervisor, that that's something that you can chat about, or something you can chat about with your program manager or your Vista leader. But thank you, Ron. All right, next slide. Okay, so this may seem super simple, but I wanted to make sure that I really covered everything from the most minute aspect of data collection to really some tips on some of the more intensive ways that you could collect information about the service that you're supposed to be providing. So in this case, just in terms of sign in and sign out sheets, a lot of you guys within your performance measures that your sites have said you're going to be doing throughout the year already involve a certain tool that you should be using to collect that output type of data. So just really simple things like we're going to have a sign in and sign out sheet, and we're going to take attendance. So for those of you who have had members at your site before, definitely just make sure that you check with your supervisor or within your legacy binder to see if there's already a sign in and sign out sheet that has been used for programs and activities in the past. If you are making your own or reviewing an old one, make sure that the sheet has enough information to help you track attendance, to help you track program completion, and to help you track service hours. So things like time in and time out are incredibly important. And having those people who are receiving the services that you're helping with, initial is incredibly important as well. And then for those of you who have, larger tasks like helping create partnerships between schools and organizations or between organization and organization, definitely start to brainstorm what type of tracking tool would you need for collecting that same type of data. For example, would it be best for you to have an activity log? So when you are doing outreach phone calls, you have jotted down, okay, I got on the call at this time, I got off the call at that time, here are the things that we talked about, or at least is there a follow-up email that can prove that that was the time that you made that phone call? Or if people are coming into your office space, if maybe they can use the sign in and sign out sheet as well, just to make sure that you really are documenting all of the different ways that you are interacting with the individuals who are receiving your services. All right, next slide. So even if you are using a formal database, so I know some of your sites will be using a database through the school where you're serving, or you'll be using something cool like Salesforce. My biggest tip is that it's always really important to just keep your own backup of all of the data that you're collecting as well. So even if there is a big database, a lot of the times, one of the scariest thing about bigger databases, especially if they're shared amongst a larger group of people, is that it's easy to lose something. For all my folks who are using like Google Sheets out there, that one, when it's shared, if someone deletes something quickly, like it is sometimes gone forever. You can restore things, but it's still going to just make this really jumbled mess from time to time. So always make sure that you're giving yourself some time, Monday morning or Friday afternoon or whatever is kind of that quieter time for you to make sure that your personal spreadsheet is kept up to date as well. Just having everything backed up is incredibly important. Technology is great, but technology is definitely still flawed. All right, next slide. So these are just some extra questions that I think are important to ask yourself when you're starting just really the simple output aspect of data collection. So first and foremost, always making sure that once you've recorded an individual receiving a service, that is the only time that individual is counted. Try your best not to double count. And if you can't guarantee, then you need to work with your supervisor on how to make sure that you really are recording the best data to really prove what has been happening at an after-school program that you're a part of or at a financial literacy night. There are going to be times when you maybe do something at a school and then also do like an SAT night, and that individual is at both events. You're going to want to make sure that that person is not double counted in those instances. Also, a lot of your programs have the question of, students have completed an educational program, or adults have completed a financial literacy class. Make sure you have a clear grasp on what it means to have completed the class. When we ran programming in Flint, our definition of completed a class was between 60 and 70% attendance. So the moment that we got to 10 sessions of a program, that's when we would be able to even gauge whether a student attended enough to gauge completion. So that again means back to that notion on sometimes having to wait until you can report on some of your data. You may be in a little bit of a holding pattern until you've done enough sessions to prove that a student has completed something. And then when you're on the partnership creating side, like I said earlier, making sure that you do have your own way of documenting when and where and for how long you're doing capacity building efforts, how long you're doing inquiries, if you're doing cold calls, if you've been doing a certain amount of emails, making sure that you have your own activity log that you can reference at any given time to say, no, I really have reached out to 13 people and 8 of them have expressed an interest in what we're doing. Because, you know, again, just everything needs to be backed up. If we want to prove that we're, like, you guys are making a difference in the communities that you're serving, the more information you can provide about that, the better. Okie doke, next slide. So now we're getting into assessments. These are kind of the tools that you'd be able to use really when focusing on your outcomes. And I just thought that that was a funny cartoon. So we can go to the next slide. Okay, so types of pre and post assessments. A lot of your sites are going to be asking for some sort of pre and post test or pre and post survey, but there's lots of different ways in which you can gauge whether or not a change in knowledge or skill has been acquired due to the programming or activities that your site provides. So the most simple one, and the one that a lot of sites most likely still will use, is just surveys. It's really the go-to way to collect data, especially when it's from a targeted group. Always make sure that your questions are specific. I think one of the things that a lot of people when writing surveys do is they kind of dance around the question that they want to ask. Make sure that you're really working hard to say, okay, like, I want to know if you know how to balance a checkbook the first time that you come into one of our programs. And 10 weeks later, I'm going to ask you again, do you know how to balance a checkbook? So that you can really just cross-reference those two surveys and say, okay, this gentleman has now proved an increase in knowledge from when he started to ended the programming. And just remember that while we all are a little bit more technologically savvy these days, you are going to be working with some populations where it's still going to be important to administer surveys by phone or in person. SurveyMonkey is great. It's definitely a really great way to tabulate all of the information that you've acquired. But you sometimes are going to be working with people who don't have access to a computer, sometimes don't even have access to a phone. So making sure that those surveys are still as accessible as possible is really important. The next type of assessment is an assessment. Just another way to really decide whether or not somebody has grasp over a concept, a topic, or has achieved a certain thing. For a lot of folks who are in school-based programming, that assessment may be something that's not created by you, but is analyzed by you. So if you need to go and speak with a certain amount of teachers about whether or not a student is more proficient in math or science or whatnot, that assessment may be something that they're going to do, and you may just be the one to tabulate that information. But if that is the case, definitely, if you feel so bold, ask what the assessment looks like so that you feel confident that your outcome question has been answered through the assessment that's being given. So, you know, make sure that if you can schedule a meeting just with someone who knows what that assessment looks like, that you can get a copy for yourself. The next form of a pre and post assessment would be a qualitative interview. So asking more open-ended questions that are still related to exactly the question that you want answered. But, you know, also receiving some information that could give you really good insight into other gaps in the community that you're serving. This relies on a lot of time. So, you know, for some of you guys who are hitting the ground running, you may be like, yeah, I cannot hold an interview right now. But it definitely is something that can really lead to a lot of insight for the community that you're serving. You can do them face-to-face or over the telephone. And then focus groups are a lot like qualitative interviews, but you know, with a larger group instead of one-on-one. And they're often used to collect information on topics that could benefit from group discussion. So if you're trying to figure out how to launch a specific program that has never been in the community before, it may be really important to talk with a larger group of people, maybe even people who you want to target for that program, to say, you know, what's worked in this public library before? Like, what's made you guys want to come? What hasn't worked? What's made a distance between the programming at this community center and you know, the population? So you know, it's another thing where you definitely have to carve out the time to do so, but it could really provide you with a lot of information on where people are at in the community. Next slide. The last two types of assessments are also, again, as you go lower down, they get a little bit harder to complete, but they do still provide a lot of information. So the last two types are participant observation or field notes. So that's when you're kind of on the outside looking in and just taking a robust amount of notes on what is and isn't happening. One of my favorite forms of participant observation is actually the Youth Program Quality Assessment Toolkit. It is like a long list of boxes that you can check off where you're kind of rating where a program is at, and you can do it when the program begins and when the program ends. This really helps out with making sure that the program actually does provide all of the things that it's promising to provide, in this case specifically for youth. But the assessment tool is really that you as the assessor are just watching the program exist in whatever form it comes out, and you're taking notes on everything from, is there a water fountain nearby that works? And are there doors that are accessible for a handicapped individual who wants to get into the building? All the way up to, do youth have a voice in this program? Are there leadership opportunities for youth? And kind of everything in between. Are the snacks healthy? Does the program have enough things to do for students who are done with their work early? All of that stuff. So I used it a lot when I was an AmeriCorps member myself, and in my first couple of years after. There are definitely other assessments on the participant observation side that may be useful. And again, some of these assessment tools may not be what you wind up using to actually collect the data that you report back, but they could still be very helpful when you're starting to do those gap analyses that some of your sites may need right now. So they may be great for really figuring out how to address the specific need that you need to address during your program year. The last type of assessment is a document review. So really just going through things like meeting minutes, program logs, training materials and manuals, annual performance reports, and kind of putting those next to what is happening this year. So especially for those of you who may be more on the capacity building side, a document review could be really helpful, just because it is the type of thing to say, okay, last year's training materials were, 4 pieces of paper and 1 slideshow. This year's training materials are a binder that can be easily replicated year to year. That is actually showing a change that you've impacted at your site that you can report on. So for some sites, even though that does involve a little bit more time, it is definitely something that I would suggest doing.
Elizia, we have a couple questions regarding assessments, so I'll read them off to you. We have one from Mia. She says, as far as data collection in schools, for example, I'm supposed to engage students and relate that to attendance. Would an anonymous student survey, such as how many days did you miss last month before engagement versus how many days did you miss last month after engagement, count as good data? With the barriers of what schools are able to share about student information, this seems to be one of the best ways to actually get responses.
I agree. I do think that if you are able to place yourself there on the first day that a student is starting, or you're able to say, hey, coordinator of this engagement program, when a new student comes, I need them to take this survey ASAP, then that's a great way to collect the data. And, the other thing is seeing if there's the possibility of asking a teacher like, hey, so the student said that they weren't absent before this program started, and I'm pretty positive that's not true. Do you have it? Can you double check this and let me know? If there's any way to get an ally at the school that could help make sure that the information you're getting from students is correct. Another thing we did with Flint Community Schools sometimes was once you start to engage parents and stuff like that, you can try to double check that information with them as well. But just make sure you have a system down if you are doing pre and post surveys for students before they start a program, because a lot of the times they may not start the program at the first day. They might start the 3rd day that the program is happening.
Okay, and we have one more from Kat, who asks, what was the method of participant observation called that you used?
Youth program quality assessment. YPQA is an easy way to look it up as well. If you look it up online, there is actually a free document you can download to do the assessment, or to just go through it yourself to see if it would be helpful at your site.
Okay, I think that's all of them. Thank you.
No problemo. All right, next slide. So just like I did with kind of the output side of things, these are just some questions that I think are important to start to ask yourself before you go into some of these deeper assessments. So like last time, is there already something that exists? There's no need to recreate the wheel if your site has already been doing a great job with these pre and post assessments in whatever way they've been done. So does your legacy binder, if you have one at your site, shed any information on the best way to collect this data? And then did my supervisor sign off on this collection method? So just make sure that you're always having somebody double check what type of survey you're using, or you're saying, hey, I'm gonna try this YPQA thing. Do you know what I'm doing? So that you don't just look like you're lurking in the back of a program, things like that. Are my questions accessible based on the population that I'm surveying? So kind of like the question about surveying youth before they start a program, do these questions make sense to a kid who probably just wants to really fill out a form quickly to actually get to the program that that they want to participate in? Do these questions make sense for English language learning population? Do these questions make sense for a population who may on average cap out at a high school degree? Making sure that you're not asking as high level questions sometimes as we may ask you, so that they are really accessible to the individuals that you're surveying. And then making sure that your assessment does show the clear narrative for those who are going to be looking at it. So like I said, at the end of the day, if you are doing a survey that is to track attendance, you're going to want to make sure that your questions are pretty much cut and dry, proving this student was absent 10 times before the program started and was absent 5 times after the program started. So they've improved attendance. And making sure that you still know exactly what the goal for improving in these things really means. So does improving attendance mean that the student is never absent again? Does improving attendance mean that a student goes from being chronically absent to sporadically absent? You know, making sure that you know how your site and your program manager and your Vista leader want that data to translate once you've collected it. Okay, next slide. So I did want to share some other resources. I sent these slides, and so these are all hyperlinks for your Vista leader and your program manager. And so if you guys are interested in any of these, definitely feel free to send these slides out. The great thing is that the Corporation for National and Community Service actually does have a knowledge network that has a lot of information that I even brushed up on about how to run evaluations. Evaluations are kind of the largest scale thing that you will be doing in your life if you stay in the nonprofit realm or in the education realm. While you guys aren't necessarily running full evaluations, the Knowledge Network does give you some extra information about data collection, because data collection is such an important part of running evaluations. And then from there, the rest of these documents are really just about, you know, other deep dives into what an evaluation could look like. Again, providing you just with more information on how to set up the charts that you may want to use for collecting your data, how to report out what the data really means, things like that. So again, these are all hyperlinks for the master copy that I sent over to M&A if you guys are interested in any of those. And of course, as an AmeriCorps alum, CNCS is always my favorite. Next slide. So if there are any other questions, I definitely open to them. But I know I just took questions like 2 slides ago. Okay, well, we can just go to the next slide then. And I mean, I can like sit on the call for a sec if someone has any questions.
Yep, we don't have any questions right now, so.
Okay. I feel very comfortable with that. Thank you guys. So yeah, that's the end of it. Good luck.
Thank you, Elizia. This is really helpful. Yeah.
Great.
For this year, so.
So yeah, good luck with everything.
Thank you.
I'm on all of your sides.
Yay! All right. Bye, Elizia. Bye.
Bye.
All right. Are we muted? Can you bring that over to me? Do you want to be muted? No. Okay, we're not muted.
Hi, guys. I hope that you found Elizia's presentation informative. I think that you could all take something from this back to your host sites in terms of data collection throughout your service year. And I just have some housekeeping reminders for you. So timesheets and monthly reports for August were due on August 31st. And if you haven't turned yours in, please do so before tomorrow. Tomorrow will be the 1 week mark since they were due. So they are mandatory, and they do need to be turned in on time. I know that with the holiday weekend and with training in the last few weeks of just starting your service, I know that there's adjustments, and I know that you guys are adjusting to your environment. So I just want you to keep in mind that these are due, and we do need your timesheets and monthly reports. Next, do you want to do a little bit more about the Habitat for Humanity keynote?
Yeah, so in the email Maggie sent out yesterday that had the on-site orientation checklist and all of that, there is a little blurb about a professional development opportunity. It's September 19th, and Habitat for Humanity is bringing in a keynote speaker for their annual conference. So that's in Lansing. It's free, but we do need to RSVP, and it includes dinner. It's from like 6:30 to 8:30-ish. So if you want to go, we have to RSVP ahead of time, so we need you to RSVP to us by tomorrow. So I know it's short notice, but if you're interested, please just email marry me, and we'll be there. So you can come hang out with us too.
The woman is highly recommended by Oprah, which is very fitting for the last slide. So, yeah, we're going to be there, and if you want to just come up to Lansing, go to a free dinner, listen to an awesome keynote speaker, then let us know.
I think
I
think she's talking about like poverty and inequality, and I think she's especially known for her work with like marginalized communities.
Great. So next on the list is your on-site orientation checklist, which is also known as your OSAT. And it's due September 15th. Maggie sent out an email yesterday including the OSAT, I believe.
Yes.
And you are supposed, and your supervisor should already know, but you go through your OSAT with your supervisors, they sign off on it, and then you send it back to us. So that's due by the 15th. And then if you could please fill out and submit the contact information form sent out by Maggie as soon as you can. So that is, we want your updated contact information. So instead of having your personal email, we want your professional email that is provided to you by your host site and your office/work phone number, just because we want to have all that information. And if someone wants to get in contact with you, we know where to get in contact with you. Or if we want to connect vistas throughout the state and Ronald is like, oh, I want to get in touch with Mia, then we'll have Mia's contact information on file. So, so please send that in ASAP. Anything else? Do you guys have any questions for us about deadlines, upcoming paperwork that's due, timesheets, monthly reports? Nobody? If not, that's okay. And if you do end up having questions, please contact Mary or Zakia, your VISTA leaders, and we can answer them for you. Is that it? I think that's it, guys. So thanks so much for attending our September webinar. We have one in October, and I hope you guys have a great rest of your week.
Appreciate you guys. Thank you much.
Bye.
Kudos.
Bye. Oh, and we'll stay on the line for a few minutes in case anyone has questions.